Sometimes a man loses so much that starting over feels like the only way to survive. Dennis Holbrook had lost his job, his marriage, and nearly his faith in himself when he bought an abandoned mansion in the mountain town where his father grew up. He paid almost nothing for it at auction. The place was covered in ivy, windows broken, paint peeling away like old memories. At the gas station, an old mechanic looked at him and said, "That house belonged to the Volano family." Mafia back in the day, most people would have walked away. Dennis walked in. Inside, he found hidden rooms, old letters and photographs that connected his late father to secrets he never knew existed. What was his father's connection to the Volano family? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Dennis Holbrook sat in his truck outside the Millcrest town limits, engine idling, hands gripping the steering wheel like it might steady the rest of his life. 45 years old, and everything he'd built had collapsed in the span of 18 months. First, the engineering firm downsized, 22 years of service reduced to a severance check and a handshake. Then Francine filed for divorce, and the lawyers picked apart their marriage like vultures on a carcass. The house went to her. The savings split down the middle, then halved again by legal fees. Their son Kendrick, 22 and finishing college, had watched it all with the quiet disappointment of someone who'd believed his parents were better than this. Dennis had $3,000 in his checking account, a truck with 160,000 miles on it, and a deed to a property he'd bought sight unseen at a county auction. The listing had been bare bones. Historic estate, Millcrest, CO, as his condition. Minimum bid $2,800. He'd bid $3,000. Won by default. No one else wanted it, and spent the last week driving west with nothing but a duffel bag and the growing suspicion he'd made a terrible mistake. Millcrest appeared through the morning mist, like something from an old photograph. Population 1847, according to the faded sign. Main Street stretched 3 blocks, a diner, a hardware store, a post office, a gas station, and a handful of other buildings that looked like they'd been standing since before Dennis was born. The mountains rose on all sides, pine-covered and ancient, holding the town in a kind of eternal twilight even at midday. He pulled into the gas station, filled the tank, and went inside to pay. The man behind the counter was 70 if he was a day, wearing coveralls and a name tag that read Forrest. He looked at Dennis the way small-town people look at strangers, polite, but measuring. "Just passing through?" Forrest asked. "Actually, I bought a property here," Dennis said. "The old estate up on Ridgemont Road." Forrest's expression changed. "Not hostile, but guarded." "The Volano place. That's what the deed says." "Well, it just says Ridgemont Estate, but that house belonged to the Volano family," Forrest said quietly. "Mafia back in the day. Been empty near 40 years. Dennis felt something cold settle in his stomach. The listing didn't mention that. Wouldn't, would it? Forrest rang up the gas, handed Dennis his change. "You planning to live there?" "Planning to fix it up. Maybe sell it once it's livable." Forrest nodded slowly. "Well, good luck to you." The drive up Ridgemont Road took 15 minutes, winding through dense forest until the trees opened onto a clearing. And there it was. The mansion stood like a monument to decay. 3 stories of Gothic revival architecture, all pointed arches and steep gables wrapped in ivy so thick it looked like the forest was trying to reclaim it. Windows were broken or boarded. The front steps sagged. Paint had peeled away in long strips, revealing grey wood underneath. A rusted iron gate hung open on broken hinges. Dennis sat in the truck staring. This was what $3,000 bought you. A project so overwhelming it made his chest tight. He got out, walked to the front door. The porch groaned under his weight. He pulled the key from his pocket, it had come in the mail with the deed, and tried the lock. It turned, reluctant but functional. The door swung open on shrieking hinges. Inside, dust hung in the air like fog. The entry hall was vast, with a staircase sweeping up to the 2nd floor. Furniture sat draped in sheets, ghostly shapes in the dim light. Everything smelled of rot and time, old wood, mildew, something animal that had probably nested in the walls. Dennis walked through the ground floor, taking inventory. A parlor, a dining room with a table for 12. A kitchen that looked like it hadn't been updated since 1960. A study lined with empty bookshelves. Every room told the same story, grandeur gone to ruin. He'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes when he found it, sitting on a side table in the study. An envelope, newer than everything else in the house, his name written across the front in careful script. Dennis opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a single rusted iron key and a note on plain paper. "You'll know when you need this." No signature, no explanation. He stood there, key in palm, and felt the first real tremor of unease. Someone had been in this house recently. Someone knew he was coming. That night, Dennis slept in his truck, parked in the circular driveway with the doors locked. He told himself it was practical. The house had no electricity, no running water, no heat. But the truth was simpler. The mansion felt wrong, not haunted exactly, just watchful. He woke at dawn, stiff and cold, and drove back into town. The diner was open, a handful of locals already nursing coffee. Dennis took a booth by the window and ordered breakfast from a woman in her 50s, whose name tag read Paulette. "You're the one who bought the old Volano place," she said. Not a question. "Word travels fast. In Millcrest? Honey, word travels before you even arrive." She poured his coffee. "Forrest called me last night. We're all curious why anyone would want that house." "Needed a fresh start," Dennis said. "Seemed like a project." Paulette studied him with eyes that had seen plenty of men running from something. "Well, you need supplies, Hendrick's Hardware is next door. You need advice, most folks here will give it. You need history." She paused. "That's trickier. History about the house?" "About the family. The Volanos." She glanced around the diner, lowered her voice. "They left town in 1982, just vanished. Salvatore Volano, his wife, his daughter, all the associates. Federal investigation, rumors of witness protection, all kinds of stories. But nobody really knows. And the folks who might know don't talk about it." Dennis thought about the envelope, the key. "Did you know them? The Volanos?" "I was a kid then. But I remember the mansion always had people coming and going. Nice cars, men in suits. It looked impressive from the outside." She refilled his coffee. "My advice, fix the place up, sell it, move on. That house has a history that doesn't need digging up." But Dennis was already thinking about the leather-bound journal he'd seen in the study, tucked on a shelf behind where the envelope had been. He'd been too unsettled by the key to look at it closely, but now his curiosity burned. After breakfast, he bought basic supplies, work gloves, a crowbar, trash bags, a Coleman lantern. The hardware store owner, Hendrick, was friendly, but offered the same warning Paulette had. "That house has seen some things. Just be careful." Back at the mansion, Dennis set up a work area in the parlor and retrieved the journal from the study. Leather-bound, heavy, filled with entries in cramped handwriting. The dates ranged from 1975 to 1982. Most entries were numbers, columns of figures, abbreviations, codes he couldn't decipher. Financial records, maybe. But in the margins, written in a different hand, were notes, names, dates, and one name that appeared again and again, circled, underlined. Luther Holbrook, Dennis's father. His hands went numb. Luther Holbrook had died when Dennis was 19, a quiet man who'd worked as an accountant, who'd never spoken about his past, who'd raised Dennis alone after his mother left when he was 5. Luther had been gentle, reserved, someone who read books and tended a small garden and never raised his voice. What was his name doing in a Volano family ledger? Dennis flipped through the journal, heart pounding. More references to Luther. LH confirms northern route. LH says wait until March. Trust LH's numbers. His father had been connected to the Mafia, deeply connected. The room felt smaller suddenly, the shadows deeper. Dennis set the journal down, walked outside, gulped air. His entire understanding of his father, of his own history, had just shifted. He needed answers, but everyone in town had warned him not to ask questions. Dennis stood in the overgrown garden, surrounded by the ruins of a house built by criminals, and realized He was going to ask anyway. Because whatever his father had been involved in, whatever secrets this mansion held, they were part of Dennis now. And he'd spent too long running from hard truths. It was time to stop running. Kendrick arrived 3 days later, driving a beat-up Honda with Massachusetts plates and a backseat full of textbooks. Dennis heard the engine before he saw the car, and his stomach clenched with a familiar mixture of hope and dread. Their relationship had been strained since the divorce, not hostile but careful, like they were both walking on glass. His son climbed out tall and lean, with Francine's dark hair and Dennis's grey eyes. He looked around at the mansion, at the crumbling facade and wild gardens, and his expression said everything. "Dad, what the hell is this?" "It's a project," Dennis said. "It's a disaster." Kendrick walked closer, shaking his head. "You spent your savings on this?" "Not all of it. Most of it." Dennis tried for a smile. "Want to see inside?" They walked through together, Kendrick's silence heavy with judgment. Dennis showed him the parlor where he'd been sleeping in a borrowed cot, the kitchen with its ancient appliances, the study with the journal still sitting on the desk. "You're living like a squatter," Kendrick said finally, "in a house that used to belong to the mob. I know it looks bad." "It doesn't look bad, Dad. It is bad. You drove halfway across the country to live in a condemned building because, what, you couldn't face staying in Boston?" The words stung because they were true. Dennis had been running from the divorce, from the job loss, from the pity in his friend's eyes. He'd needed distance and purpose, and this mansion had offered both. "I'm trying to rebuild," Dennis said quietly. "I needed something that was mine." Kendrick's expression softened slightly. "Then let me help. I've got the summer before grad school, and you clearly need it." They spent that first day clearing debris from the main rooms, hauling out water-damaged furniture and boxes of mouldering papers. The work was hard and dirty, but it felt good. Around mid-afternoon, while tearing down a section of damaged paneling in the dining room, Kendrick's crowbar punched through the wall into empty space. "Dad, there's something back here." They widened the hole carefully. Behind the paneling was a hidden compartment, maybe 2 feet deep and 4 feet wide. Inside were items wrapped in oilcloth, preserved against the moisture. Dennis pulled them out one by one, a bundle of letters tied with string, newspaper clippings yellowed with age, and a photograph. He unwrapped the photograph first, black and white, slightly faded. 4 men standing in front of the mansion, probably late 1970s based on their clothes. 3 wore dark suits, looked like exactly what they were. Mobsters. Hard faces, confident stances. But the 4th man was different. Younger, uncomfortable in his suit, smiling awkwardly at the camera. Luther Holbrook, Dennis's father. One of the suited men had his arm around Luther's shoulder, familiar and possessive. On the back, someone had written in faded ink, "Brothers in all but blood, summer 1978. "Is that Grandpa?" Kendrick leaned over his shoulder. Dennis nodded, unable to speak. He'd never seen his father look like this, younger than Dennis was now, caught in a world Dennis couldn't reconcile with the quiet accountant who'd raised him. They examined the other items. The newspaper clippings were about the Volano family. Investigations, arrests of associates, speculation about organized crime in Colorado. The letters were harder to read, some in Italian, others in English, but coded. References to shipments, routes, payments, and through it all, mentions of Luther. "Your dad was involved with these people," Kendrick said slowly. "Like, really involved." Dennis sat back on his heels, photograph in hand. He never said a word, not once. "I thought he was just an accountant." Maybe he was, maybe he did their books or something. Maybe. But the photograph suggested more than that. The way the man's arm wrapped around Luther's shoulders, the caption about brotherhood. This was intimacy, not just business. That evening, Dennis drove back to the gas station. Forrest was closing up, counting the register, but he looked up when Dennis walked in. "Need something?" Dennis pulled out the photograph. "I need you to tell me about this." Forrest went very still. He stared at the photograph for a long moment, then at Dennis. "Where did you find that?" hidden in the mansion, behind a wall, and you want me to tell you about it. I want you to tell me about my father." Dennis's voice was steady, but his hands shook. "That's Luther Holbrook. He died 26 years ago, and I never knew he was connected to the Volanos. But you did. The way you reacted when I said I bought the house, you knew." Forrest sighed, set down the cash he'd been counting. "Your father was a good man." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer I'm giving you tonight." Forrest looked at him with something like pity. "Luther Holbrook came to this town in the 70s, worked for the Volano family, and left in 1982 when everything fell apart. What he did in between, that's his business, and it's dangerous business to go digging into." "Dangerous how?" "The kind of dangerous where people ask questions and then stop asking questions real sudden." Forrest handed back the photograph. "You seem like a decent man, Dennis. Take my advice. Fix up that house, don't go poking around in history, and move on with your life." Dennis drove back to the mansion in silence, Forrest's words echoing. But when he got there and showed Kendrick what little he'd learned, his son said exactly what Dennis was thinking. "We can't just drop this. That's your father. Don't you want to know the truth?" "I do, but Forrest said it's dangerous." "Forrest is an old man in a small town. What's he going to do, run us out with a pitchfork?" Kendrick gestured at the hidden compartment, the evidence scattered around them. "This stuff has been sitting here for 40 years. Whatever danger there was is long gone." Dennis wanted to believe that. But that night, as they settled in, Kendrick in a sleeping bag in the parlor, Dennis on his cot, he couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Around 2 a.m., he woke to a sound. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, on the floor above them. He sat up, heart hammering. Beside him, Kendrick stirred. "Dad, did you hear that?" They listened. Silence now, heavy and waiting. "Stay here," Dennis whispered. He grabbed his flashlight, moved toward the stairs. Every instinct screamed at him to stay put, but anger overrode fear. Someone was in his house. He climbed the stairs slowly, flashlight beam cutting through darkness. The second floor was a maze of rooms, most still locked. He checked each door, found them all secure. Nothing, no one. But when he returned to the parlor, Kendrick was standing by the hidden compartment, face pale. "Someone was here while you were upstairs," he pointed. "The letters, they were stacked differently." "I'm sure of it." Dennis examined the compartment. Kendrick was right. The bundle of letters had been moved, refolded slightly. Someone had come in while Dennis was checking upstairs, looked through their discovery, and left. "We should call the police," Kendrick said. "And tell them what? Someone broke into our house that used to belong to the Mafia, looked at our hidden evidence, and left without taking anything?" Dennis shook his head. "We need to figure out what's in these letters first. Then we'll know what we're dealing with." They spent the rest of the night awake, lights on, taking turns watching. And Dennis realized with cold certainty that Forrest had been right. Some history was dangerous to dig up, but it was too late to stop now. They established a routine over the next week. Mornings were for renovation, ripping out rotted drywall, replacing broken windows, hauling debris. Afternoons were for research. Evenings, they locked the doors and tried not to think about footsteps in empty rooms. The letters from the hidden compartment were difficult to decipher. Most were in Italian, which neither of them spoke. The English ones used code words and abbreviations that meant nothing without context. But the ledger Dennis had found in the study, that was different. On the 5th day, while Kendrick was in town buying supplies, Dennis spread the ledger across the dining room table and really studied it. Columns of numbers, dates ranging from 1975 to 1982, abbreviations like NR and SR and WD. Financial records clearly. Money moving in and out. Large sums, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands. And in the margins, in a neater hand than the columns, notes. LH confirms route clear. Per LH, recommendation delay until weather improves. LH, accounting accurate, proceed. Luther Holbrook had been tracking money, not just recording it, analyzing it, advising on it. Dennis's father had been deeply embedded in the family's financial operations. He felt sick. Luther had raised him to be honest, to do the right thing, to treat people fairly. And all along, he'd been laundering money for the Mafia. When Kendrick returned with lumber and paint, Dennis showed him the ledger entries. Maybe he didn't have a choice, Kendrick said. Maybe they forced him. Or maybe he chose it. Dennis's voice was harder than he intended. Maybe the man I thought I knew was a fiction. Kendrick set down the supplies, came to stand beside his father. You can't judge him without knowing the whole story. Can't I? He lied to me my entire life. Did he? Or did he just not tell you everything? Kendrick pointed at the ledger. Look at these notes. Whoever wrote them trusted your dad, relied on him. That means something. Dennis wanted to argue, but exhaustion won out. They'd been working 14-hour days in a house that felt increasingly oppressive. Every creak, every shadow, every moment of silence felt loaded with threat. That afternoon, Dennis drove to the Millcrest Public Library, a small building on Main Street, one room with maybe 3,000 books and a single computer. The librarian was a woman in her 70s, white hair pulled back in a neat bun, glasses on a chain around her neck. "Help you find something?" she asked. "I'm looking for newspaper archives, specifically about the Volano family." Her expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. "You must be the one who bought the mansion. Dennis Holbrook, Greta Moss." She studied him for a moment. "The archives are on microfiche in the back. But I can save you some time, there's not much." The family kept a low profile, and when they disappeared, most records got sealed by the FBI. You remember them? I was young, but yes. This was a small town then, even smaller than now. Everyone knew the Volanos owned that mansion, and everyone knew to mind their own business about it. She moved toward the back of the library, gesturing for him to follow. "What's your interest?" "Besides owning their old house." Dennis hesitated, then pulled out the photograph. "My father, Luther Holbrook. He was connected to them somehow." Greta took the photograph and her face softened. "Luther, yes, I remember him. He was different from the others." "Different how?" "Gentler. He'd come into town, always polite, always quiet. The other men who worked for Salvatore Volano, they had an edge to them. But Luther seemed," she paused, searching for the word, "conflicted. Did you know what he did for them?" "No one knew specifics. We knew better than to ask." She handed back the photograph. "But there were rumors, toward the end, that someone had talked to the FBI. That's why the family disappeared so suddenly. Some people thought it was Luther." Dennis felt his chest tighten. "He was an informant?" "I don't know. It was just talk." Greta led him to a desk with the microfiche reader. "But I'll tell you this. After everyone left, after the FBI investigation fizzled out and the mansion sat empty, your father never came back to Millcrest. Not once. That tells me he either did something he was ashamed of or something he was afraid of." She left him with boxes of microfiche and silence. Dennis spent 3 hours reading archived newspapers. Most articles were vague. Federal investigation into Colorado crime family. Volano associates questioned by FBI. Salvatore Volano whereabouts unknown. Nothing concrete. Nothing about Luther. But one article, dated November 1982, mentioned a cooperating witness who had provided substantial financial documentation to investigators. No name given. Dennis photographed the screen with his phone, gathering evidence. When he returned to the mansion, Kendrick had made progress on the parlor, new drywall up, floor cleared and swept. It looked almost livable. "I think I found something," Dennis said, showing him the article about the cooperating witness. Kendrick read it, then looked up. "You think that was Grandpa?" "Greta at the library said there were rumors, and it would explain why his name is all over that ledger. He had access to everything." Dennis sat down on a sawhorse, suddenly exhausted. If he was an informant, he was brave, incredibly brave. But it also means he was part of it first. You don't inform on people you aren't working with. So he made mistakes, then tried to fix them. Kendrick shrugged. "Sounds human to me." Before Dennis could respond, his phone rang. Francine. He considered not answering, but Kendrick was watching. "Hello?" I want to know why our son is wasting his summer in Colorado, helping you play house in some mob mansion." Francine's voice was sharp, familiar in its anger. "Kendrick is an adult. He made his own choice. He made a stupid choice. Just like you did buying that place." A pause. He should be doing an internship, building his resume, not playing contractor with his deadbeat father. The word stung. Deadbeat. Maybe she was right. "I didn't ask him to come," Dennis said quietly. "But you didn't send him away either. You never could say no to him, or to anyone." Another pause. "I'm telling you, Dennis, if this affects his graduate school prospects, I'll make sure everyone knows it's your fault." She hung up. Dennis sat there, phone in hand, feeling the weight of his failures. Lost job, failed marriage, and now he was dragging his son into some dangerous mystery about a father who'd lied to him for 19 years. Kendrick touched his shoulder. "Don't listen to her. I'm here because I want to be. You should be building your future, not helping me excavate my past." "Maybe they're the same thing." Kendrick picked up a hammer, gestured at the room. "You're rebuilding this place, learning about Grandpa. That's worth something." That night, Dennis found fresh footprints in the dust on the 3rd floor, a floor they hadn't accessed yet because the stairway was unstable. Someone was still getting in, still watching, and Dennis was starting to think they weren't trying to scare him away. They were waiting for him to find something. The letters arrived in Dennis's understanding the way dawn comes to mountains, slowly, then all at once. They'd been working through the bundle from the hidden compartment for days, trying to decode the Italian ones with an online translator, making little progress. But on a Tuesday morning, while Kendrick was reinforcing the front porch, Dennis found a smaller bundle he'd missed, tucked inside the others, wrapped separately in faded blue ribbon. Personal letters, handwritten on good paper, intimate in a way the others weren't. The first was dated April 1976. "My dearest Luther, I know this is dangerous. I know my father would be furious if he knew I was writing to you. But after last night, after what we talked about in the garden, I had to tell you I feel the same way. I've felt this way for months. You're not like the other men who work for Papa. You see me, not just Salvatore's daughter. You make me feel like a person, not a possession. Meet me Thursday at the place we discussed. I'll find a way. All my love, Anita." Dennis read it 3 times, then reached for the next letter. And the next. The bundle contained maybe 30 letters, spanning 4 years. A correspondence between Luther Holbrook and Anita Volano. A love affair. The letters painted a picture Dennis had never imagined. His father, young and conflicted, falling in love with the daughter of a crime boss. Anita's letters were passionate, sometimes playful, increasingly desperate as the years went on. Luther's responses, fewer but preserved here, showed a man torn between love and conscience. One letter from Luther, dated September 1979, made Dennis's hands shake. "Anita, I can't keep doing this. Not the lying, not the money, not watching your father hurt people and pretending it's just business. You say you don't see that side of him, but I do. Every day I see it. I'm keeping records now, everything, all of it. Not because I want to betray him, but because I need insurance. If we're going to leave together like we've talked about, I need something to protect us. Please understand, this isn't about revenge. It's about survival. Yours and mine. I love you, L." So Luther had been documenting the Volano family's crimes, not as a loyal accountant, but as someone planning an escape. The last letter from Anita was dated March 1980, and it changed everything. "Luther, Papa knows. Not about us, not yet, but about the FBI. Someone told him there's an investigation, that someone close to him is cooperating. He's becoming paranoid, suspicious of everyone. You need to be careful. If he even suspects it's you." I can't finish that sentence. "I'm terrified. For you, for us, for what's coming. Maybe we should run now, tonight, before it's too late. I don't care about the money or the house or any of it. I just want you safe. Please, Luther. Let's just go." Dennis sat back, letters scattered across the dining room table. His father had been an FBI informant, in love with a mobster's daughter, collecting evidence while trying to protect her. It was brave and reckless and doomed, He searched for Anita Volano online, found an obituary immediately. Anita Marie Volano, 24, died November 3rd, 1983, in a single car accident on Route 14 outside Millcrest, Colorado. Survived by her mother, Rosa Volano. Services private, 1 year after the family disappeared. 1 year after Luther must have fled. Dennis felt grief for a woman he'd never met, for a stepmother he'd never known he had. His father had loved her and lost her and never spoken of it. "Dad?" Kendrick stood in the doorway, covered in sawdust. "You okay?" Dennis showed him the letters, explained what he'd found. Kendrick read them in silence, his expression shifting from curiosity to sadness. Grandpa was in love with her, and she died? Probably because of what he did. Dennis's voice was hollow. He turned informant, the family scattered, and Anita, "You don't know that. The obituary says accident. In a small town where everyone knows to keep their mouths shut about the Volanos. Where the library doesn't even have real records." Dennis shook his head. Someone killed her. Punishment for Luther's betrayal, or revenge, or just to tie up loose ends. Kendrick was quiet for a moment. That would have destroyed him. It did destroy him. Dennis thought about his father, the quiet man who'd raised him alone, who'd never dated, who'd seemed perpetually sad in a way Dennis had never understood. He spent the rest of his life carrying that guilt. That afternoon, Dennis drove back into town, needing to talk to someone who'd been there. He found Greta at the library, cataloguing new books. "I found letters," he said without preamble. "Between my father and Anita Volano." Greta set down her work. "I wondered if you would. You knew about them." "I suspected. Anita and I were friends in high school before her family moved to the mansion. We stayed close." She gestured to a table in the corner. "Sit, I'll tell you what I know." They sat, and Greta's voice took on the careful tone of someone sharing dangerous memories. Anita was smart, kind, trapped by who her father was. When Luther came to work for Salvatore, she saw a way out. Not just from the family, but from the life. Luther was educated, principled. They fell in love quickly. She paused. "I knew about the FBI cooperation. Anita told me. She was terrified, but she believed in what Luther was doing. What happened to her?" Greta's eyes filled. "The official story is a car accident. She lost control on a mountain road, went over the side. But Anita was an excellent driver, and the road was dry that night. I never believed it. Who would have killed her?" The family had enemies, rival organizations who would have seen the Volanos fall as an opportunity. She hesitated. "There were rumors that Salvatore himself ordered it, that he blamed her for Luther's betrayal, thought she'd helped him." Dennis felt sick. Her own father? Salvatore Volano was not a forgiving man, and family loyalty meant everything to him. Greta folded her hands. "After she died, Luther never came back. I always wondered if he even knew, or if he'd gone into witness protection and they never told him." Dennis thought about his father's sad eyes, his silence about the past. He knew. He spent the evening with Kendrick, working on the mansion, but mostly talking. About Luther, about Anita, about the impossible choices people make for love. The house felt different now, not threatening but tragic. A monument to secrets and losses. Around midnight, they found the basement blueprint. It had been tucked into the back of the ledger, so thin Dennis had missed it initially. Architectural drawings for the mansion's foundation and basement, dated 1968. And there, marked in pencil, a room that didn't exist in the actual basement. "There's a hidden room," Kendrick said, studying the blueprint. "Here behind the north wall. Maybe 10 by 12 feet. They looked at each other. Tomorrow they'd find it. And Dennis knew with cold certainty that whatever was hidden there would change everything. The basement smelled of earth and rust, decades of moisture seeping through stone walls. Dennis and Kendrick descended the narrow stairs with flashlights and tools. The blueprint spread on an overturned crate at the bottom. The actual basement was smaller than the plans indicated. Just a furnace room, some storage space, and a coal chute that hadn't been used in 40 years. But according to the blueprint, there should be another room behind the north wall. They spent the morning tapping walls, listening for hollow spaces. Kendrick found it around noon, a section that sounded different, emptier. They cleared away old shelving units that had been positioned against the wall, probably deliberately, and Dennis took a sledgehammer to the plaster. 3 swings and the wall gave way. Behind it, a door, metal, with a combination lock that looked far newer than anything else in the house. Someone had maintained this room, upgraded its security. "We need the combination," Kendrick said. Dennis thought about the letters, about Anita's words. Dates, names, anything that might matter. Then he remembered. The last letter from Anita was dated March 1980. He tried the numbers. 03-1980. Nothing. He tried Luther's birthday. Their anniversary, if they'd had one. Nothing worked. "Wait!" Kendrick pulled out his phone, searched something. "Anita died November 3rd, 1983. Try that." 11:03:83. The lock clicked open. Inside was a small room, maybe 10 by 10, with a dehumidifier still humming quietly in the corner, powered by some electrical line they hadn't found yet. The walls were lined with filing boxes carefully labeled, and in the center, a locked trunk. Dennis pulled down the first box, opened it. Documents, bank records, shipping manifests, photographs of transactions, evidence meticulously organized. Luther's insurance policy, preserved for 40 years. "This is everything," Kendrick said, looking through another box. "Every crime the Volano family committed, documented. This could have put them all away for life. It should have." Dennis found a folder labeled FBI Contact, 1981. Inside were copies of letters between Luther and a federal agent named Whitmore, discussing terms of cooperation, witness protection, immunity deals. But there was also a final letter dated August 1982 from Whitmore to Luther, unable to proceed with prosecution. Key witnesses recanted. Physical evidence compromised during raid. Case closed. Immunity agreement voided. You're on your own. Suggest you disappear. Good luck. Dennis read it twice. The case fell apart. The FBI couldn't protect him, so Grandpa ran. Kendrick looked around the hidden room. But he left all this here. Why? Insurance. Or evidence. Or maybe Dennis moved to the trunk in the center. It was newer than everything else, military grade, with a complex lock. He tried the combination that had opened the door. It worked. Inside the trunk was a leather folder, a thick envelope, and on top, a letter addressed to Dennis Holbrook when you finally arrive. Dennis's hands shook as he picked it up. The paper was recent, the ink fresh. Someone had put this here within the last year. He opened it and read, "Dennis, if you're reading this, it means you bought the mansion and you've been smart enough to find this room. Good. You're your father's son. My name is Salvatore Volano. Yes, I'm alive, and yes, I've been waiting for you. Your father was the best man I ever knew. Honest to a fault, brave beyond reason. When he went to the FBI, I was hurt. But I understood. He did it for Anita, my daughter, because he loved her and wanted a clean life for her. I couldn't give her that. He tried. For that, I've always respected him. But there are things you need to know. Things Luther never told you because he died before he could. Come see me. I'm at Pinewood Care Center, 3 towns over in Ridgemont Falls. Ask for Sal Marino. That's the name I've lived under for 40 years. Bring the key you found at the auction. You'll understand why when we meet. I don't have much time left. Cancer, the doctors say. But before I go, you deserve the truth about your father. All of it. Salvatore Volano." Dennis read the letter aloud, his voice barely steady. When he finished, the silence in the hidden room was absolute. "He's alive," Kendrick said finally. "The head of the crime family that ruined Grandpa's life is alive, and he's been watching you. He put the key in the envelope at the auction house." Dennis felt cold. "He's known all along that I'd come here. This could be a trap. Maybe, but he's right. I need the truth." Dennis picked up the leather folder from the trunk. Inside was a USB drive and a note, Luther's testimony. Recorded 2000. Watch before you come. They took everything upstairs, set up Kendrick's laptop in the parlor. The USB contained one video file, dated March 15th, 2000, the year before Luther died. Dennis clicked play. His father appeared on screen, sitting in a nondescript room, looking older than Dennis remembered, but unmistakably himself. Gray-haired, wearing a cardigan, the same sad eyes Dennis had known all his life. My name is Luther Holbrook, his father said to the camera. I'm recording this because I'm dying. Heart disease. The doctors say I have a year, maybe 2, and I need my son to know the truth. Dennis, if you're watching this, it means you found the mansion. Found the evidence. Maybe even found Salvatore. I'm sorry I never told you any of this while I was alive. I was ashamed. Not of fighting the Volanos. That was the rightest thing I ever did. But of being part of it in the first place. Luther shifted in his chair. His voice steady, but heavy with emotion. I came to Millcrest in 1974, young and stupid and desperate for work. Salvatore hired me as an accountant. I knew what the family was, but I told myself I was just managing numbers, that I wasn't responsible for what they did with the money. Classic rationalization. Then I met Anita, and everything changed. She was kind, intelligent, trapped in a life she hated. We fell in love, and suddenly I couldn't pretend anymore. Every dollar I tracked was blood money. Every transaction enabled violence. I had to stop it, he paused, wiping his eyes. The FBI promised protection. They lied. When the case collapsed, I ran. Changed my name, moved east, tried to disappear. But Anita, his voice broke. She stayed behind. Said she'd follow once things settled. They killed her, Dennis. I don't know if it was Salvatore or his enemies or someone cleaning up loose ends. But she died because of choices I made. I've lived with that for 18 years. Luther looked directly into the camera, and Dennis felt his father's gaze across time. You were always stronger than me, son, braver. I hope this mansion teaches you something I learned too late, that courage isn't avoiding hard choices. It's making them and living with the consequences. I love you. I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry I was never the hero you deserved. The video ended. Dennis sat in silence, tears running down his face. Kendrick put a hand on his shoulder. We're going to see Salvatore, Dennis said finally. I need to hear the rest. They spent 2 days searching for the entrance to the hidden room's climate control system, finally tracing the electrical line to a panel concealed behind the furnace. Someone had been maintaining it remotely, paying the bills through an automated system, keeping the dehumidifier running, preserving the evidence for decades. Salvatore had been preparing for this moment since Luther died, maybe longer. Dennis couldn't shake the feeling of being orchestrated, manipulated into a meeting with a dying mobster who claimed to have answers. But the video of Luther had changed something fundamental. His father wasn't the quiet, passive man Dennis had imagined. He'd been tortured by impossible choices, brave enough to act, broken by the consequences. Just like Dennis felt now, broken by divorce, job loss, the weight of his own failures. On the 3rd day, while reinforcing the basement stairs, Kendrick brought up what they'd both been avoiding. What if Salvatore is lying? What if he killed Anita himself, and this is all some elaborate justification? Then I'll know. Dennis hammered a nail with more force than necessary. But I think he's telling the truth. The way he wrote about Luther, that wasn't manipulation. That was respect. Respect from a murderer doesn't mean much. No, but understanding might. Dennis set down the hammer. Your mother called me a deadbeat. Maybe she's right. I've spent 26 years defining myself by what I'm not. Not successful enough, not present enough, not the husband she wanted. Just like I've been defining Luther by what I didn't know about him. I need to stop doing that. Kendrick was quiet for a moment. Mom was wrong to say that? Was she? I lost my job. I bought a disaster of a house on impulse. I dragged you into this mystery that might be dangerous. You didn't drag me. I chose to come. Kendrick picked up a board, measured it against the stairway. And for what it's worth, I've learned more about courage in the last 3 weeks than I did in 4 years of college. Watching you face all this, that's not deadbeat behavior, Dad. That's brave. The words settled into Dennis like rain on dry ground. That afternoon, Greta stopped by with a box of old photographs. She'd been going through her personal archives, found pictures from the late 70s when she and Anita had still been close. I thought you might want to see her, Greta said, spreading the photos on the clean dining room table. Really see her, not just read about her. Anita Volano smiled up from faded Polaroids. Dark-haired, beautiful, with an openness in her eyes that seemed impossible for someone raised in that family. In one photo, she stood in this very house, in the garden, arms spread wide, laughing at something off camera. She loved this place, Greta said softly. Not because it was grand, but because it was hers. Her father bought it for the family, but Anita made it a home. She planted the roses out front, designed the garden layout. When I heard it had been abandoned for 40 years, it broke my heart. Dennis thought about the overgrown gardens, the wild roses still blooming despite decades of neglect. Anita's legacy surviving. Did she know what her father did? The violence, the crimes. She knew. She hated it. Greta picked up a photo of Anita and Luther together. Must have been taken by Greta herself, the only evidence of their relationship. They stood close but not touching in a public park, carefully maintaining appearance. But their eyes told the whole story. She thought Luther could save her, Greta continued. Not just from the family, but from becoming like them. She was terrified she'd turn cold, calculating. Luther represented a different kind of life, and then he left her behind. He thought he was protecting her. The FBI told him she'd be safe, that they were only after Salvatore and his associates, not family members. Greta's voice hardened. They lied about that too. Dennis studied the photographs, memorizing Anita's face. She would have been his stepmother if things had gone differently. He might have had siblings, a completely different life. What happened the night she died? Greta sat down heavily. No one knows for certain. She'd been living quietly with her mother after Salvatore disappeared. Working at the library, actually. That's how we reconnected. She seemed peaceful, like she'd accepted that Luther was gone and she needed to move forward. Then one night, November 1983, she told her mother she was driving to Denver to visit a friend. Never made it. They found her car at the bottom of a ravine on Route 14. Who found her? County sheriff. Man named Willis, retired now, moved to Arizona. Greta met his eyes. He told me privately years later that something was wrong about the scene. The guardrail had been damaged, but not by her car. Like someone had rammed it first, weakened it, then forced her through. Murder staged as an accident. That was Willis's opinion. But the FBI had closed their investigation. The family was scattered, and no one wanted to reopen that case. So they called it an accident and buried her quietly. Dennis felt rage building at the FBI for abandoning Luther, at whoever had killed Anita, at all the lies and cowardice that had destroyed two people who just wanted a clean life. I'm going to find out who did it, he said. Salvatore will know, and if he's the one responsible, then I'll make sure everyone knows the truth. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, Dennis walked through the mansion with new eyes, not seeing decay and danger, but potential and history. Anita had loved this place. Luther had sacrificed everything connected to it. And now Dennis was here, pulled by forces he didn't fully understand, maybe to finish something they'd started. He found Kendrick in the master bedroom, pulling up old carpet. I've been thinking, Kendrick said. After we meet Salvatore, after we get the truth, what happens to this place? I don't know. Fix it up, probably sell it. What if we didn't? Kendrick sat back on his heels. What if we turned it into something good? A community center, maybe. Or a museum about local history. Something that honors Anita and Grandpa instead of letting their story die with this house. Dennis considered it. The mansion had been a symbol of crime, then abandonment. But it could be something else. Redemption, memory, legacy. That would take money we don't have. We have the evidence in the basement. That's worth something to historians, maybe even to the FBI for their archives. And there's still $50,000 in cash in that trunk. That's blood money. Then use it for something clean. Transform it. Kendrick stood, gestured around the room. This house doesn't have to stay a tomb, Dad. We can make it mean something. The idea took root. Not just renovation, but transformation. Taking something built on crime and turning it into a place of truth and healing. We'd need to stay in Millcrest, Dennis said. Would that be so bad? Dennis looked at his son, 22, idealistic, choosing to spend his summer rebuilding more than just a house. Choosing to stay with his father when he could have been anywhere else. No, Dennis said quietly. It wouldn't be bad at all. That night, someone left a fresh rose on the front steps. When Dennis picked it up, he found a note. "She would have liked you. SV." Salvatore was still watching, still waiting. Tomorrow, they would go to him. Dennis used the iron key on the trunk's inner compartment, a section he'd missed during the first examination. It opened to reveal items that made no sense in a room sealed since the 1980s. A USB drive, sleek and modern, a newspaper clipping from 6 months ago about Dennis's divorce, including his photograph, and a letter in a sealed envelope addressed in careful script, "Dennis Holbrook, when you finally arrive." The letter was dated 3 months ago. Kendrick picked up the USB drive, turning it over. This room was supposed to be sealed for 40 years. "How? Salvatore!" Dennis opened the letter with shaking hands. "He's been in here. Or someone working for him has." The letter was longer than he'd expected, written in the precise hand of someone who'd had plenty of time to choose his words. "Dennis, my name is Salvatore Volano, and I've been waiting 25 years for you to come to Millcrest. I knew you would eventually. Sons always seek their father's ghosts, and Luther left enough of himself in this house to haunt you properly. First, the truth about your father. He was the best man I ever knew. Honest when honesty was dangerous. Brave when bravery meant death. When he went to the FBI, I was hurt, betrayed, but I understood. He did it for Anita, my daughter, because he loved her and wanted a life that didn't stink of blood money. I couldn't give her that. I built an empire on violence and fear, and I told myself it was for family, for legacy. Luther showed me what legacy actually costs. He made a deal with me before he went to the FBI, warned me they were coming, gave me time to disappear in exchange for one thing: leave Anita alone. Let her go. I agreed. I thought if I vanished, she'd be safe. I was wrong. Dennis's hands trembled. He kept reading. My enemies, rivals I'd spent decades crushing, they saw my disappearance as weakness. They came for what they thought would hurt most. Anita died November 3rd, 1983. Not an accident. Murder. I found out 3 days later, already in hiding, already a ghost. I couldn't even go to her funeral. That's when I understood Luther's rage, his desperation to escape. We'd both lost her, both failed to protect the one pure thing in that whole rotten world. Luther lived with guilt. I've lived with it longer. This mansion has been maintained by a man named Pietro Vasari. I raised him after his parents died, tried to give him something better than I had. He's been watching this house for 40 years, waiting for you. The intrusions you noticed, that was Pietro, checking on what you found, making sure you were safe. He's not a threat, he's protection. I'm dying, Dennis. Cancer, aggressive, maybe 3 months. I've arranged for you to inherit documentation that will clear Luther's name officially. FBI records, testimony, everything needed to show he was a hero, not a criminal. But I need to meet you first. I need to tell you what Luther never could. There's more to this story, more about why he bought this house years after everything fell apart, more about what he wanted you to find. Come see me at Pinewood Care Center in Ridgemont Falls. Ask for Sal Marino. Bring the key. You'll understand everything. Salvatore Volano. Dennis set down the letter. His entire understanding of the past 3 weeks had just shifted. Salvatore hadn't been a threat. He'd been an architect, carefully, arranging Dennis's discovery, protecting him through Pietro, waiting for the moment when Dennis was ready for the full truth. "The USB," Kendrick said quietly. "We need to see what's on it." They went upstairs, connected it to the laptop. One video file, dated March 2000, the same year as Luther's testimony. But this video was different. Luther sat in the same room, but he looked directly at the camera with an intensity Dennis had never seen in his father. Dennis, if you're watching this with Salvatore's letter, it means you've come further than I dared hope. You've found the evidence, read the letters, learned about Anita. Now you need to know the rest. I bought the Volano mansion in 1999, 17 years after everything fell apart. Bought it through a shell company, let it sit empty, and arranged for it to be auctioned to you after my death. Why? Because you needed this journey. You needed to see that your father wasn't the weak, passive man you thought, that I made hard choices, fought for something, loved deeply enough to risk everything. I've watched you, son, watched you settle for less than you deserve, accept mediocrity, let other people define your worth. You're so much stronger than you know. This mansion is my gift to you, not the building but the truth inside it. The story of flawed people trying to do right in impossible circumstances. Salvatore and I stayed in contact over the years. Not friends exactly, but two men bound by shared loss. He's helped me preserve this evidence, helped arrange your inheritance. He's not the monster you might think. He's a man who made terrible choices and has spent 40 years trying to atone. Luther leaned closer to the camera. When you meet him, and you will, listen to what he tells you about the night Anita died. He knows who killed her. He's been protecting that information for 40 years because revealing it would have started a war that would have killed dozens. But now he's dying, and that war doesn't matter anymore. Get the truth from him, then decide what to do with it. I love you, Dennis. I'm proud of the man you've become, and I hope this house teaches you what it taught me, that we can build something good from broken foundations. That courage isn't being fearless, it's being terrified and choosing right anyway. Be braver than I was. Build something beautiful, your father. The video ended. Dennis sat in silence, processing. Luther had orchestrated everything. The auction, the evidence, the connection to Salvatore. This entire journey had been designed by his father 25 years ago. He knew you'd need this, Kendrick said softly. After the divorce, after losing your job, he knew you'd need purpose. He died in 2001. I was still married then, still working. Dennis shook his head. How could he have known? Maybe he didn't know the specifics, but he knew you. Knew you'd doubt yourself eventually. Knew you'd need proof that fighting for what's right matters, even when you lose. Dennis thought about his father's sad eyes, the weight Luther had carried. He'd been preparing this gift for years, not money or property, but understanding. Legacy. We need to meet Salvatore, Dennis said. Tomorrow. I need to know about Anita's death. That night, Pietro finally revealed himself. A knock on the door around 9, and when Dennis answered, he found a man in his 60s, built like someone who'd been dangerous once, now softened by time. My name is Pietro Vasari, he said. Salvatore sent me to bring you to him, but first I wanted to apologize for the intrusions. I've been watching this house since 1983, making sure it stayed preserved. When you arrived, I continued. I meant no harm. You've been protecting me. Salvatore's orders, you're Luther's son. That makes you family in the ways that matter. Pietro pulled an envelope from his jacket. This is for you, from Anita. Luther kept it all these years, gave it to Salvatore. Before he died, asked him to give it to you when you were ready. Dennis opened the envelope. Inside was a photograph. Anita and Luther together, truly together, embracing in the mansion's garden. Happy, in love, and on the back, in Anita's handwriting. For Dennis, Luther's son, your father was the bravest man I ever knew. He taught me that love is worth any risk. Remember that. Anita, 1982. She'd written it for him before she died. Before she even knew he'd exist in her life. Dennis looked at Pietro, at the mansion behind him, at Kendrick standing in the doorway. Tomorrow, he said, we go tomorrow. Pietro nodded. Salvatore is ready. He's been ready for 25 years. Morning came cold and clear, the mountains sharp against a pale sky. Dennis stood in the mansion's garden, holding the photograph of Luther and Anita, trying to steady his nerves. In a few hours, he'd meet the man who'd shaped his father's life, who'd lost the same woman Luther had lost, who'd been waiting a quarter century for this conversation. Pietro arrived at 8 with coffee and a small box. Inside was Luther's pocket watch, silver, tarnished, with an inscription Dennis had to squint to read. Time reveals all truths. A.V. Anita gave this to your father on their first anniversary, Pietro said. Luther wore it every day until he died. Salvatore kept it safe for you. Dennis turned the watch over in his hands, felt its weight. His father had carried this, touched it, checked the time with it thousands of times. It was more intimate than any letter. "Why did Salvatore take you in?" Dennis asked. "After your parents died, why you?" Pietro smiled slightly. "My father worked for the Volano family. Low level, just a driver. He was killed in 1979, caught in crossfire between rival families. My mother died 6 months later. Grief, the doctor said, but I think it was just broken heart. Salvatore found me in a foster home, paid for my education, gave me a life. He said he owed it to my father. But I think," he paused, "I think after Anita died, he needed someone to protect, someone to prove he could do right by. Did he tell you about her? About what happened?" "Some, never the full story. He said that was for you to hear." Pietro checked his watch. "We should leave soon. Salvatore tires easily now. The cancer is aggressive." Kendrick came out of the house, cleaned up and ready. Behind him, Forrest emerged from a truck Dennis hadn't heard arrive. "Thought you might want company," the old mechanic said. "Luther was my friend. I knew him before the Volanos, knew him during, knew him after. If Salvatore's finally talking, I want to hear it." Dennis felt gratitude warm his chest. "Thank you." They drove in convoy, Pietro leading in his sedan, Dennis and Kendrick following, Forrest bringing up the rear. The route took them through mountain passes, small towns, landscapes that must have looked the same when Luther drove these roads 40 years ago. "You scared?" Kendrick asked. "Terrified," Dennis admitted. "What if Salvatore tells me something I can't handle? What if he's the one who killed Anita? Then we deal with it, together." Kendrick looked at the pocket watch Dennis had set on the dashboard. "But I don't think he did. The letter, the way he talks about her, that's not a killer. That's a father still grieving." Dennis wanted to believe that. But he'd learned in the past 3 weeks that people contained contradictions. Luther had been both accountant and informant, both loving father and keeper of deadly secrets. Salvatore could be both grieving father and murderer. Pinewood Care Center appeared after 2 hours of driving. A low, modern building surrounded by pine trees, surprisingly peaceful. They parked and Pietro led them inside, past a reception desk where the staff clearly knew him, down a hallway that smelled of antiseptic and flowers. "He's in the solarium," Pietro said. "Spends most of his time there now. Says he likes watching the light." The solarium was glass-walled, filled with plants and afternoon sun. And in a wheelchair by the window sat an old man, 90-something, gaunt from illness, but with eyes that were still sharp and clear. Salvatore Volano looked up as they entered, and his face transformed with recognition. "You have Luther's eyes," he said, his voice rough but strong. "But your mother's kindness, I can see it." Dennis approached slowly, Kendrick and Forrest flanking him. Pietro stepped back, giving them space. "Mr. Volano," Dennis began, but the old man waved a hand. "Salvatore, or Sal if you prefer. I've been Sal Marino so long I barely remember being anyone else." He gestured to chairs arranged near him. "Sit, please, I don't have the strength to crane my neck." They sat. The moment felt suspended, heavy with years of secrets about to be spoken. "You read my letter," Salvatore said. "Not a question." "And watched my father's video. He said you know who killed Anita." Salvatore's expression went distant, pained. "Yes, I've known for 40 years. The question is whether you're ready to hear it. I came all this way. I'm ready." Salvatore studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Your father was right about you. You have courage." He shifted in his wheelchair, the movement clearly painful. "The night Anita died, she wasn't driving to Denver to visit a friend. She was driving to meet me. I'd contacted her first time in a year, told her I wanted to say goodbye properly, told her I was leaving the country, starting over, and I needed to see her one last time. It was a lie. I wasn't going anywhere, but I needed her to come." Dennis felt cold. "You set her up?" "No, God, no." Salvatore's eyes filled. "I wanted to reconcile, to tell her I understood about Luther, that I forgave her for loving him. But someone else knew about the meeting. Someone who'd been watching me, waiting for an opportunity." "Who?" "My brother, Vittorio Volano." Salvatore's voice turned bitter. "My younger brother, who'd always been jealous of my position, who saw the family's collapse as his chance to take control. He thought if he killed Anita, he'd hurt me enough that I'd retaliate, start a war with our rivals, destroy myself in the process. Then he'd pick up the pieces. Forrest spoke up from behind Dennis. Vittorio disappeared the same time you did, because I made him disappear. Salvatore's expression was cold. 3 days after Anita's funeral, which I watched from a distance, couldn't even approach her grave, I found Vittorio. He confessed, thought I'd be proud he'd avenged the family's honor. I killed him with my own hands, buried him where no one would ever find him. Then I vanished completely. The silence in the solarium was absolute. You murdered your own brother, Dennis said quietly. Yes, and I'd do it again. Salvatore looked at him steadily. Does that make me a monster? Probably, but Anita was innocent. She loved your father, wanted a clean life, and she died because my brother wanted power. So I took everything from him, life, legacy, even his grave. He doesn't exist in any record. As far as history knows, Vittorio Volano vanished in 1982 and was never seen again. Dennis absorbed this. His father had loved a woman killed by her uncle in a power play. Salvatore had avenged her by killing his own brother. The violence spiraled back and forth, each act trying to balance some cosmic scale. Why tell me this now? Because I'm dying, and someone needs to know the truth. Because your father deserves his story told completely. And because... Salvatore reached into a bag beside his wheelchair, pulled out a folder. I've spent 40 years building a case file on everything the Volano family did. Every crime, every victim, every dollar. I've also documented my brother's confession, my actions, everything. When I die, this goes to the FBI. Luther Holbrook will be officially recognized as a hero who risked everything to stop us. And Anita will be remembered as his beloved, not just a mob daughter. He held out the folder to Dennis. This is your inheritance. Not money, not property. The truth. What you do with it, that's up to you. Dennis took the folder with shaking hands. Inside were hundreds of pages, meticulously organized, a lifetime of crimes and confessions. There's more, Salvatore said. Pietro will give you the rest. But first, I need to tell you why Luther bought the mansion for you. Salvatore gestured for Pietro to bring something, a small wooden box, carved with initials, LH plus AV. Your father made this, Salvatore said. Carved it in the workshop behind the mansion. He gave it to Anita on her birthday, 1979. Inside, she kept every letter he wrote, every promise they made to each other. After she died, I recovered it from her apartment. Kept it safe all these years. Dennis opened the box with trembling hands. Inside were more letters, dried flowers pressed flat by time, a silver bracelet with tiny charms, and beneath it all, a photograph he hadn't seen before, Anita, Luther, and a young Salvatore at a family dinner table, all smiling genuinely. They looked like family. Not criminals and victims, not mobster and informant, just people sharing a meal and a moment of peace. That was taken 6 months before everything fell apart, Salvatore said softly. We'd had Christmas dinner together, December 1981. Anita insisted, said Luther shouldn't spend the holiday alone. I agreed because his voice caught, because I could see she was happy, truly happy for the first time in her life. And I loved her enough to want that, even if it meant losing her to someone outside the family. Dennis stared at the photograph, memorizing details. His father looked younger than Dennis was now, full of hope, despite the impossible situation. Anita glowed beside him, her smile unguarded and radiant. And Salvatore looked like a man who knew he was watching something precious slip away, but was grateful to witness it anyway. You loved her, Dennis said quietly. Not romantically, but like a daughter, like the best part of myself. Salvatore took the photograph with shaking hands, traced Anita's face with a trembling finger. When she was born, I was already deep in the family business. Already had blood on my hands, had made choices I couldn't take back. But holding her, watching her grow, I wanted to be better. I tried in my way. I kept the worst violence away from her, sent her to good schools, let her have friends outside our world. But it wasn't enough. The violence always finds you, always. Forrest leaned forward from his position behind Dennis. Did Luther know you supported their relationship? Not at first. He thought he was betraying me, risking everything behind my back, stealing from the lion's den. Salvatore's expression softened with memory. But I knew from the beginning. Had them followed, watched them fall in love in secret. And I let it happen because Anita deserved someone who saw her as more than Salvatore Volano's daughter. She deserved to be loved for herself, not for what she represented or what she could provide. He looked directly at Dennis, his aged eyes still sharp with intensity. Your father was terrified of me, absolutely terrified. He'd seen what I did to people who crossed me, who threatened what was mine. But he still chose her, still pursued her despite the danger. That's courage, Dennis, real courage. Not the absence of fear, but action despite it. Then why did he go to the FBI? Kendrick asked, unable to contain his confusion. If you approved of their relationship, if you wanted Anita to be happy, because I approved of her loving him. I didn't approve of him loving her enough to want to take her away completely. Salvatore's expression hardened, old anger surfacing. Luther wanted to leave. Witness protection, new identities, cutting all ties with everyone she'd ever known. That meant cutting ties with me, with her mother, with everything. That I couldn't accept. I told him no. Told him if he wanted out, he'd have to find his own way, but Anita stays. So he built a case against you, Dennis said slowly, understanding dawning. Evidence strong enough to force the FBI to act, to give him leverage for protection. Yes, spent 2 years documenting everything, every transaction, every crime, every connection. He was meticulous, your father. Kept duplicate records, photographed documents, recorded conversations. Built an airtight case. Salvatore closed his eyes, remembering. When I found out, not the details at first, just that someone close was talking to federal agents, I had my suspicions. But I didn't want to believe it was Luther. When did you know for certain? Forrest asked. March 1982. One of my contacts in law enforcement warned me the FBI was preparing to move. Said their source was someone with access to financial records. Only 3 people had that level of access, and 2 of them were family. Salvatore opened his eyes. So I confronted Luther. Called him to the mansion, to the study. Same room where you found the journal, Dennis. We sat across from each other and I asked him directly, "Are you the one talking?" The solarium was silent, except for the whisper of the air conditioning, the distant sound of someone walking in the hallway outside. What did he say? Dennis asked. He admitted everything immediately, didn't try to lie or deflect. Just said yes, he was cooperating with the FBI. Said he was sorry, but he couldn't live with what we were anymore. Couldn't raise children, your potential siblings, in a world built on fear and violence. Said he loved Anita too much to let her waste her life waiting for her father to get arrested or killed. Salvatore's hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair. I was furious. Felt betrayed by the one man outside my blood I'd truly trusted. I'd given him access to everything, treated him like family, and he was building a case to destroy me. But you didn't kill him, Dennis said. No, because even in my anger I understood. He was doing it for love. For the same reason, I'd built my empire, to protect what mattered most. We just had different ideas about what protection meant. Salvatore shifted in his wheelchair, clearly in pain, but pushing through it. He offered me a deal right there in the study. Said he'd give me a week to disappear before the FBI executed their warrants. In exchange, I had to promise to leave Anita alone. Let her go with him if she chose. Let her have a clean life, away from everything. And you agreed, Forrest said. I did. Because despite everything, despite my pride, my anger, my fear of losing her, I wanted Anita happy more than I wanted revenge. I thought I was doing the right thing. Thought if I vanished, if I let the empire fall apart, she'd be safe. That Luther could give her the life I never could. Salvatore's voice broke. I was wrong. Dennis felt unexpected sympathy surge through him. This old man, this criminal who'd done terrible things, had genuinely loved his daughter, had made what he thought was a sacrifice for her happiness, only to have it end in her death anyway. You couldn't have known what Vittorio would do, Forrest said quietly. Couldn't I? My brother had always been violent, always been ambitious, always resented that I was the one who ran things. I should have seen it coming. Should have killed him years earlier, before he could hurt anyone I loved. Salvatore looked at Dennis with desperate intensity, needing him to understand. Your father and I both failed her, but at least he tried to build something good from the wreckage afterward. He went on, raised you, lived a decent life even with the guilt. I just hid, disappeared into a new identity, and spent 40 years being a ghost. Dennis felt the weight of parallel grief, his father carrying guilt for Anita's death. Salvatore carrying the same burden, both men haunted by a woman they'd loved and lost. Why did my father buy the mansion? Dennis asked, returning to the question that had brought them here. That's what you said you needed to tell me. Salvatore's expression shifted, something like pride crossing his face. Because Luther Holbrook was smarter and braver than either of us gave him credit for. After he died, heart attack in 2001, sudden and quick, I received a letter from his attorney. Instructions he'd left, things he wanted me to help arrange. The mansion was central to his plan. What plan? To teach you what he couldn't say in life. Salvatore smiled slightly, the first real smile Dennis had seen from him. He bought the property in 1999, a year after he was diagnosed with heart disease. Bought it through a shell company, let it sit empty and decaying, and meticulously arranged for it to be auctioned to you after his death. Everything you found, the journal, the letters, the hidden room, the evidence, he placed it all there deliberately. Dennis felt his understanding shift again. He orchestrated my entire discovery, every step. He knew you'd eventually hit bottom. Didn't know it would be divorce and job loss specifically, but he knew life would knock you down eventually. It does that to everyone. And he knew you'd need something more than sympathy or advice. You'd need proof that fighting for what's right matters, even when you lose. That courage persists beyond failure. That broken people can still build something meaningful. Kendrick spoke up, his voice full of wonder. He set this up 25 years ago. Before Dad's marriage even started falling apart. He knew his son, Salvatore said simply. Knew you'd doubt yourself, Dennis. Knew you'd need evidence that your father wasn't just a quiet, sad man who lived a small life. He wanted you to see him as he really was, flawed, brave, capable of great love and terrible fear, but always trying, always reaching for something better. Dennis looked down at the photograph in his hands, at three people frozen in a moment of fragile happiness. His father had spent his final years creating this gift, not a house or money, but understanding, legacy. He wanted me to have what he never could, Dennis said slowly, a place where truth lived openly, where the past wasn't hidden in shame, but examined with honesty. Yes, Salvatore reached out, and Dennis took his hand, papery skin over fragile bones, the hand that had killed and built and carried a daughter's memory for 4 decades. And he asked me to help, asked if I'd watch over you when you came, make sure you found everything, protect you while you learned. It was the least I could do for him, for both of them. Pietro stepped forward from his position by the window. I've been maintaining the mansion for 40 years under Salvatore's orders. Keeping the evidence preserved, the hidden room functional. When you arrived, I continued watching, making sure you were safe, that no one else interfered with your discovery. The footprints, Dennis said. The things moved around. That was you. Yes, I apologize for frightening you. But Salvatore was very clear. You had to find everything yourself. I could only observe and protect. Dennis looked at Salvatore, at this dying man who'd spent half his life atoning for the other half. There's something else. You said there was more to tell me. Salvatore nodded slowly. Yes, the most important part. What Luther wanted me to give you myself in person, so you'd know it was real. He reached into his jacket with visible effort. Salvatore reached into his jacket with visible effort, his movement slow and deliberate. He pulled out a sealed envelope, the paper thick and expensive, the kind meant to last. Across the front, in Luther's familiar handwriting, were the words, "For Dennis, from your father. He gave this to me in March 2000. 3 months before he died. Salvatore said, his voice barely above a whisper. Made me promise, absolutely promise, to deliver it personally when you came. Not through Pietro, not through the mail. He wanted you to receive it from my hands, so you'd understand that even enemies can become something else when bound by shared loss. Dennis took the envelope with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The weight of it felt immense, far heavier than paper should be. This was his father reaching across 25 years of death, across decades of secrets, to speak directly to him. He broke the seal carefully, unfolded 3 pages covered in Luther's neat script. The handwriting was shakier than in earlier documents. His father had been dying when he wrote this, his heart already failing. "My dearest Dennis," it began. Dennis's vision blurred immediately, but he blinked hard and continued reading aloud, his voice unsteady. Kendrick moved closer, one hand on his father's shoulder. Forrest leaned forward. Even Pietro seemed transfixed. "If you're reading this, it means you found the mansion, discovered the evidence, and met Salvatore. It means you've learned that your father wasn't the simple, quiet man you thought. I'm sorry for the deception. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the truth while I was alive. But I hope by now you understand why I couldn't. Some truths are too dangerous to speak aloud when the people involved are still living, still vulnerable. They have to be discovered after enough time has passed, when revelation can't destroy anyone else." Dennis paused, swallowed hard, continued. "You were always stronger than you knew, son. Always braver than you believed. I watched you grow into a good man, honest, kind, principled. Everything I tried to be and often failed at being. When I learned I was dying, when the doctors told me I had maybe a year left, my greatest fear wasn't death. I'd made peace with dying. My greatest fear was that you'd go through life, never understanding your own strength, never knowing you come from people who fought impossible battles and loved despite terrible costs." The words hit Dennis like physical blows, each sentence reshaping his understanding of himself and his father. "I know what you're thinking right now," Luther's letter continued. "You're thinking I lied to you your whole life, that I was a hypocrite, raising you to be honest while keeping massive secrets. And you're right, I was both those things. But I was also trying to protect you from a burden you didn't need to carry, from knowledge that could have made you a target if the wrong people learned you knew about the Volano family's activities." Dennis looked up at Salvatore. "Was I really in danger, even as a child?" "Yes," Salvatore said bluntly. "If my enemies had known Luther had a son, they would have used you as leverage. That's why he moved east, changed employment records, made it look like he'd never lived in Colorado. He erased his connection to this place to keep you safe." Dennis returned to the letter, his throat tight. "The mansion is yours because I wanted you to have something I never did. A foundation you built yourself, on truth rather than lies. The building doesn't matter. The money doesn't matter. What matters is the journey of finding them, of seeing that your father was flawed and brave simultaneously, that Anita was loving and doomed, that even Salvatore, a man who did terrible things, was capable of genuine love and sacrifice. We're all complicated, Dennis, all broken and trying, all making choices with incomplete information and hoping we choose right more often than we choose wrong." Luther's handwriting became shakier on the second page, the letters less controlled. "I failed, Anita. That's the truth I've lived with for 18 years now, and it's the truth I'll die with. I thought I could save her by exposing her father's crimes, by forcing the FBI to act, by creating a situation where we'd both get new identities and a clean start. Instead, I created a power vacuum that got her killed. My courage, if you can even call it that, cost her everything. That's what I need you to understand, son. Courage without wisdom is just recklessness. Good intentions without foresight can cause immeasurable harm." Dennis's tears fell freely now, dropping onto the paper. Kendrick's grip on his shoulder tightened. "But here's the other truth, the one that matters more," the letter continued. "Even knowing how it ended, even carrying the guilt of her death, I would make the same choice. Because doing nothing, staying silent, continuing to enable violence, that would have destroyed me in a different way. I would have lost myself, become someone I couldn't live with. Anita understood that. In her last letter to me, she wrote, "Whatever happens, I'm glad you tried. I'm glad you were brave enough to fight for something better, even if we lose." That letter is in the wooden box Salvatore will give you. Read it. Understand that she didn't blame me, even though I blamed myself. Salvatore spoke up quietly. That's true. Anita knew the risks. She supported what Luther was doing, even knowing it might cost them everything. Dennis wiped his eyes, forced himself to keep reading. I failed you too, son. In many ways. I wasn't present enough when you were young, always distant, always carrying sadness you couldn't understand. I should have been a better father. Should have taught you more directly about courage and morality and making hard choices. But I was too consumed by my own guilt. Too busy trying to live small and quiet, so no one would notice me, so I could keep you safe through anonymity. That's not an excuse, just an explanation. The final page was the hardest to read, Luther's words becoming more personal, more raw. This house holds money. $50,000 in the basement trunk, old bills I'd saved from before everything fell apart. It's yours. Use it however you wish. But my real gift is this: permission to be imperfect. Permission to make hard choices and live with consequences. Permission to love fiercely even when loss is inevitable. You'll face your own impossible situations, Dennis. Everyone does. Divorce, job loss, failures that feel like the end of the world. When that happens, and it will, remember that courage isn't being fearless. It's being terrified and choosing right anyway. It's getting back up after you've been knocked down. It's building something new from broken pieces. Dennis could barely see through his tears now, but he pushed forward. Be better than I was, son. Be braver. Build something beautiful from these broken foundations. Don't hide from your failures like I did. Don't let guilt consume 40 years of your life. Learn from my mistakes. Take the evidence I've gathered, take the truth about who I was, and use it to become who you're meant to be, someone who acts despite fear, who loves despite risk, who builds despite knowing that everything we build eventually falls apart. And know that everything good in my life came from trying to be worthy of you. You were my redemption, Dennis, my proof that something clean and good could come from my broken choices. I love you, son. I'm proud of you, and I hope this journey teaches you what you needed to learn. Your father, Luther Holbrook. The letter ended there, Luther's final period a slight smudge where his hand must have trembled. Dennis sat in silence, the letter clutched in his hands, tears streaming down his face. The solarium felt sacred suddenly, like a confessional or a courtroom where final truths were spoken and received. Salvatore spoke softly, giving Dennis time to absorb everything. He wrote that 1 month before he died. The heart attack came suddenly, but he'd prepared. He'd already set everything up. The mansion auction, the evidence placement, my role in your discovery. He knew he might not have much time. Why did you agree to help him? Dennis asked, his voice raw. After everything, after he betrayed you, after Anita died, why would you spend 25 years carrying out his wishes? Salvatore's eyes filled with tears for the first time. Because he asked. Because it was the only thing he ever asked of me, after everything fell apart. And because, his voice broke, because I owed it to Anita. She loved him. She would have wanted him to find peace, to give his son this gift. And after I failed to protect her, the least I could do was protect her memory by honoring what Luther wanted. He reached into the bag beside his wheelchair again, pulled out a folder thick with documents. This is the other part of my promise to him. Legal documentation that will clear Luther's name officially. I've worked with lawyers for years, compiled testimony from former FBI agents, gathered evidence that proves Luther Holbrook was a cooperating witness who risked his life to expose organized crime. When I die, which will be soon, the doctors say weeks now, not months, these documents go to federal prosecutors. Your father will be recognized publicly as a hero who made impossible sacrifices for justice. Dennis took the folder, opened it. Inside were hundreds of pages, affidavits, FBI memos, testimony transcripts, letters from federal agents confirming Luther's cooperation. Everything needed to transform his father from a forgotten accountant into a recognized hero. This will be in newspapers, Pietro added. The FBI has agreed to add Luther's name to their memorial for civilian cooperating witnesses. There will be recognition, official acknowledgement of what he did. Dennis looked at the photograph again, at his father's face frozen in a moment of happiness. Luther had orchestrated all of this, the discovery, the evidence, the final recognition from beyond the grave. Had loved his son enough to spend his final year creating this elaborate gift of truth and redemption. He wanted you to forgive yourself for being human, Salvatore said quietly. That's what all of this is really about. Can you do that, Dennis? Can you accept that you're flawed and brave simultaneously? That your failures don't define you any more than Luther's mistakes defined him? Dennis thought about his divorce, his lost job, the years of feeling inadequate. Thought about Luther's guilt and Salvatore's grief, and how they'd all been carrying weight that maybe didn't need to be carried quite so heavily. He thought about the mansion waiting for him in Millcrest, about Kendrick choosing to stay with him despite everything, about the possibility of building something meaningful from broken foundations. I can try, Dennis said finally, his voice steady now. I can try to be brave enough to forgive myself, to build something good despite the failures. Salvatore smiled, genuine warmth breaking through decades of careful control. Then you're already braver than both of us. Luther would be so proud of you. He reached out his hand, and Dennis took it, this old man's hand trembling with illness that had killed and built and carried impossible burdens. They sat like that for a long moment, connected by grief and understanding, by the memory of two people who'd loved each other and paid terrible prices for that love. Thank you, Dennis whispered, for protecting him, for protecting this story, for waiting 25 years to give me this gift. It was all I could do, Salvatore said, his voice barely audible. All I could offer to make up for everything I failed to do when it mattered most. Outside the solarium windows, the sun was setting behind the mountains, painting everything gold and amber. Inside, 4 men sat in silence, bound together by secrets finally spoken, by truths finally revealed, by the complicated legacy of people who'd tried their best and failed and tried again anyway. It was enough. It had to be enough. 3 months later, the mansion stood transformed. The ivy had been trimmed back to reveal clean stone, windows replaced and gleaming, the front steps rebuilt and solid. Inside, the rooms that had held decades of secrets now held something else, history preserved with honesty. Dennis stood in what had been the parlor, now converted into a main exhibition hall. Display cases held the letters between Luther and Anita, the photographs, the evidence of both crime and courage. On the wall, a large placard told the story completely. The Volano family and Luther Holbrook, a history of impossible choices. Kendrick came down the stairs carrying another box of materials. He'd moved to Millcrest permanently, deferred graduate school for a year to help establish what they were calling the Holbrook Center for Local History. His relationship with Bridget had deepened. She was here now, helping arrange chairs for tonight's opening reception. Mom called, Kendrick said, setting down the box. She saw the news article about Grandpa being recognized by the FBI. She wanted to say... He paused. She said she was proud of you. Of us, Dennis absorbed that. Francine's voice had been different on the phone last week, softer, genuinely respectful. The article in the Denver Post had told Luther's story. Local hero's secret sacrifice finally, revealed after 40 years. The FBI had officially recognized Luther Holbrook as a cooperating witness whose intelligence had contributed to multiple organized crime investigations. His name was being added to a memorial in Washington for civilians who'd aided federal law enforcement at great personal risk. That means something, Dennis said. Her saying that. It does. Kendrick looked around the transformed space. You think Grandpa would approve of all this? I think he'd be amazed. But yes, I hope so. The center had taken shape faster than Dennis had imagined. The $50,000 from the trunk had covered initial renovations. Then Salvatore's estate, he'd passed away 6 weeks ago peacefully with Pietro beside him, had provided an endowment. The old mobster's will had been specific: funds to maintain the Holbrook Center in perpetuity, to ensure the stories of Luther, Anita, and the cost of redemption would be told honestly. Greta had become the center's curator, working with historical societies and the FBI to compile accurate records. Forrest volunteered as a guide, finally able to speak openly about his friend Luther. Even the town had embraced it. Millcrest's dark history was now its most interesting feature, drawing visitors who wanted to understand how crime and courage intersect. But for Dennis, the center was something more personal. It was proof that broken foundations could support something good, that stories told honestly had power. He walked through the rooms, checking final details before tonight's opening. The study where he'd found Luther's journal now served as a reading room, filled with books on ethics, justice, and moral complexity. The dining room where they'd discovered the hidden compartment was preserved behind glass, a reminder of how secrets hide in plain sight. And in the master bedroom, now a small theater, Luther's video testimony played on loop. Visitors could sit and watch Dennis's father explain his choices, his love for Anita, his hope that courage mattered even when everything fell apart. Dennis paused there now, watching his father's face on screen. The sad eyes he remembered, but also something he'd missed as a child: determination. Luther hadn't been weak. He'd been carrying weight that would have crushed most people. "You did good, Dad," Dennis whispered to the screen. "I understand now." That evening, the center filled with people. Town residents who remembered the Volano era, historians interested in organized crime, young people curious about moral complexity, journalists covering Luther's recognition story. And in the corner, quietly observing, Pietro Vasari, who'd been offered a position as the center's director of security, though there was nothing to secure except memory. Dennis stood before the gathered crowd, notes in hand, but not needing them. He'd lived this story now, understood it from the inside. "My father, Luther Holbrook, bought this mansion for me 25 years ago," he began. "Not as a gift of property, but as a gift of truth. He wanted me to understand that good people make terrible mistakes, and terrible people sometimes make good choices. That courage isn't about being fearless, it's about being terrified and choosing right anyway. This center exists because Luther loved a woman named Anita Volano, because he tried to protect her and failed, and because he spent the rest of his life trying to build something meaningful from that loss. We've preserved his story here, and hers, and Salvatore's, not to celebrate crime, but to understand how people navigate impossible situations, how they fail and try again, how love persists even through violence and grief." He paused, looked around the room at faces reflecting varying emotions: interest, sadness, recognition. "If you take anything from visiting here, let it be this: we're all more complicated than we appear. We all carry secrets and wounds and hopes for redemption. And sometimes the bravest thing we can do is tell the truth, even when it's painful." "Especially when it's painful," the crowd applauded. Dennis stepped back, let Greta take over the formal tour. Later, as the evening wound down, Kendrick found him standing outside in the garden where Anita had planted roses 45 years ago. They were blooming again, carefully tended, a living memorial. "You okay?" Kendrick asked. Dennis nodded. "Better than okay. I feel like I finally understand what I'm supposed to be doing. Not running from failure, but building something despite it." They stood together in comfortable silence, father and son, as lights from the center glowed warm against the evening sky. The mansion was no longer a tomb or a mystery. It was a legacy, imperfect, honest, and worth preserving. Inside, Luther's video played to another group of visitors. His voice carried through the open window. "Be braver than I was. Build something beautiful," Dennis had. And it was enough.